The chamber of the Galactic Council was built to inspire awe. It floated in the void above the neutral world of Kaliros, a vast ring-shaped structure of glass and steel that gleamed like a crown around the planet's equator. Its vaulted ceilings were lined with silver spires that seemed to stretch into infinity, its floors polished to mirror perfection. Thousands of beings from 100 worlds filled the tiers, scaled, feathered, furred, and human alike. Delegates gathered for a rare event broadcast live across the galaxy. It was meant to be a day of unity. At the heart of the chamber stood President Jonathan Hale, leader of the United Earth Alliance, his tall figure illuminated by the glow of the central dais. Hale's voice carried with the practiced cadence of a man who had guided his people through hardship. His presence radiated calm strength, the kind that reassured allies and unsettled enemies. "Too long," he said, his voice echoing across the vaulted chamber, "has this galaxy been ruled by fear and division. Too long have we placed walls between species instead of building bridges. Humanity came not to conquer, but to endure, to cooperate, to belong. Let us build a future together, where no voice is silenced, where no people are left behind." On Earth, millions watched the broadcast. Families in New York gathered around holoscreens. Colonists on Mars paused work to listen. Soldiers stationed in orbit stood at attention, pride swelling in their chests. For once, it seemed the galaxy might truly turn a corner. And then the shot rang out. A single sound, sharp and unnatural, cracked through the chamber. For an instant, silence. Then President Hale staggered, eyes wide with shock. Crimson blossomed across his chest, staining his ceremonial white robe. Gasps erupted from the delegates as Hale collapsed, his body striking the marble floor with a final, hollow thud. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Screams echoed, some high-pitched, others guttural. Security officers surged forward, weapons raised, scanning the galleries. Delegates scrambled over one another, scattering like frightened animals. On the holofeed, billions across the galaxy watched in horror as the unthinkable unfolded live before their eyes. The cameras caught the blood pooling beneath Hale before cutting abruptly to black. Back on Earth, silence spread like a suffocating blanket. In Washington, D.C., the president's cabinet sat frozen in the Situation Room, disbelief painted across their faces. On Mars, miners dropped their tools, staring in shock at the holoprojectors. On Luna, cadets in training stood motionless, some openly weeping. It wasn't just the death of one man. It was the death of hope. For minutes, humanity could only stare into the void of disbelief. And then, as grief welled, another emotion began to take root: anger. Not the kind that burned hot and short, but the kind that seared cold and enduring, sinking deep into the marrow of a species that had clawed its way through extinction more than once. General Marcus Reed, commander of Earth's Defense Armada, stood in silence as aides rushed around him. The broadcast had cut out mid-transmission, but the look on Hale's face, the sound of that single shot, it was enough. Inside the war room, the only sound was the hum of the holographic projectors. The galaxy map glowed, displaying borders, factions, and fleets. Yet no one could take their eyes off Reed. At last, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "They killed him." Admiral Sarah Whitlock, head of the Pacific Fleet, clenched her fists. "General, we don't even know who." "We don't need to know who," Reed cut in, his steel-gray eyes narrowing. "The moment that shot was fired in that chamber, the galaxy declared war on us. They think we'll bow. They think we'll scatter. But they've forgotten who we are." He turned, sweeping his gaze across the officers, each one standing rigid beneath the weight of his words. "Mobilize the fleets. I want every ship armed and ready. Reactivate the old yards in Jupiter orbit. Send word to the colonies. This isn't defense anymore. This is retribution." Whitlock's voice was hard, but quieter now. "You mean to bring war to the council?" Reed's jaw tightened. He thought of Hale's steady hand guiding Earth through famine, his speeches that had held the fragile alliance together, the hope he had kindled in billions of hearts. "They took our leader," Reed said. His tone left no room for doubt. "We take their armies. Their fleets. Their worlds. Until the stars themselves remember what it means to strike at mankind." Across Earth, grief turned into a single, unyielding flame. Factories roared to life, producing tanks, fighters, and ships at a speed unseen since the darkest days of human history. Shipyards hidden in asteroid belts awoke, their dormant colossi of steel and fire stirring as if called by some ancient instinct. Old oaths, sworn in blood and iron, were spoken again in whispers and in roars. On the streets of New York, candlelight vigils transformed into marches of thunderous resolve. On Mars, miners left their shafts to enlist en masse, their soot-stained faces lit with vengeance. On Europa, technicians worked without rest, forging weapons that had only existed in classified blueprints. Humanity had endured exile, plague, and war. But never had the galaxy dared to strike so directly at the heart of Earth. The assassin's bullet had not just killed one man. It had awakened something far greater, far older, a wrath forged from centuries of survival. At Hale's funeral, billions tuned in. His body lay in state beneath the open sky of Earth, his casket draped in the blue and white banner of the United Earth Alliance. Soldiers stood in solemn silence, rifles reversed, while the people wept. General Reed spoke not as a commander, but as the voice of a wounded world. "They thought his death would break us," Reed said, his voice carrying across the crowd and into every broadcast. But President Hale was not just a man. He was the embodiment of what humanity stands for: resilience, defiance, unity. And for his blood, the galaxy will pay. The crowd roared in reply, a sound that shook the ground like thunder. It was not grief anymore. It was fury. In that moment, as the stars shone coldly above, Earth made its choice. The galaxy had killed their leader. And humanity would answer with fire. The War Council gathered in silence. The chamber beneath the Andes Mountains was carved into solid stone, a fortress hidden deep within the Earth itself. Around a long oval table, the most powerful leaders of humanity sat in grim unity: General Marcus Reed, stern and unflinching; Admiral Sarah Whitlock, sharp-eyed and battle-hardened; Fleet Marshal Daniel Cross, whose scarred face carried memories of wars long past; and Director Evelyn Park, the calculating head of Earth intelligence. The holotable glowed with star maps, territories, fleet positions, supply routes stretching like glowing veins across the galaxy. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence pressed against them, heavy with the memory of Hale's blood staining the council chamber floor. Finally, Director Park broke it. Her voice was low, precise, without tremor. "They'll expect condemnation," she said. "Sanctions. Maybe even withdrawal from the council. That's how the galaxy works: bluster and delay. They will never expect what we're about to do." Admiral Whitlock leaned forward, bracing her hands on the table. "Then we strike first. Hit them where it hurts. Their fleets. Their supply lines. Their homeworlds. No mercy. No hesitation." Fleet Marshal Cross nodded, his gravelly voice filling the room. "We've been patient too long. Waiting for respect, waiting for acknowledgement. They gave us their answer with a bullet. Now we give them ours, with fire." General Reed's eyes, gray as steel, swept across the faces of his council. "You understand what you're asking for. Once we begin, there's no return. This will not be war as the galaxy knows it. This will be annihilation." Whitlock's lips curled into a grim line. "Good." Reed stood. The holographic stars flickered across his uniform, painting him in cold light. He placed both hands on the table, his voice steady, commanding. "Mobilize everything. Every fleet, every yard, every soldier. Humanity has been underestimated long enough. The galaxy will learn what it means to cross us." The orders spread like wildfire. On Earth, the skies above the Atlantic filled with ascending warships, their black hulls glinting against the sun. On Mars, factories belched smoke and fire, forges hammering out weapons that had been locked away in secret for decades. In the ice caverns of Europa, prototype rail cannons were lifted from their silos, their barrels longer than skyscrapers. Hidden shipyards, long thought mothballed, roared awake. On the edge of Saturn's rings, colossal dreadnoughts stirred from their slumber, hulks the size of cities, bristling with weapons capable of shattering moons. Their engines ignited with thunderous fury, the glow spreading across the void. Across the colonies, men and women answered the call. Miners dropped drills for rifles. Farmers left their fields to enlist. Engineers abandoned laboratories for the forges of war. Humanity, fractured and diverse, became one in grief and rage. And everywhere, Hale's name became a cry on their lips. The first strikes fell upon the Valen Dominion, the faction humanity suspected of orchestrating Hale's assassination. The Valens had laughed at Earth for decades, mocking their resilience, dismissing their ambitions. Now, their laughter ended in fire. The assault came without warning. At the orbital stations above Vela Prime, alarms blared far too late. Shadows blotted out the stars as human warships dropped from FTL, sleek, angular leviathans painted black as the void. The first salvo struck. Kinetic slugs the size of trucks tore through orbital defense platforms, reducing them to burning wreckage. Missiles streaked through the void, their warheads igniting in blossoms of white-hot fury that turned night into day. The Valen fleet scrambled to respond, but it was like throwing sand against a tidal wave. Human dreadnoughts advanced with terrifying precision, their rail cannons firing in rhythm like the heartbeat of a god of war. Inside the command ship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Whitlock stood at the bridge, her eyes locked on the carnage unfolding across the holodisplays. "Status," she demanded. "Enemy formations collapsing," her tactical officer replied. "Their flagship is trying to retreat." Whitlock's lips pressed into a thin smile. "Not today." The Resolute Dawn's spinal cannon fired, unleashing a beam of molten energy that speared through the enemy flagship, splitting it in half. The two burning fragments drifted apart, venting bodies and fire into the void. "Broadcast it," Whitlock ordered coldly. The image of the shattered flagship was transmitted across every channel. The message was clear: "You killed our leader, this is the price." But vengeance was not without cost. At the Battle of the Leon Rift, humanity's fleet faced numbers beyond reason. The Valens had rallied their allies, a swarm of ships blotting out the stars. The Resolute Dawn stood at the center, its black hull scarred from previous battles, its crew weary but unbroken. Enemy fire lit the void like a storm, the ship's shields glowing white-hot under the relentless assault. On the bridge, officers shouted over the thunder of impacts. Sparks showered from ruptured conduits. Alarms wailed. "We're outnumbered 10-1, a young lieutenant cried. Whitlock turned, her gaze burning with a fury that could outshine the stars. "Then let them come. Let them see what 10 humans are worth." The Resolute Dawn roared back. Its cannons fired in unison, tearing through enemy cruisers like paper. Its fighters swarmed, weaving between enemy fire with impossible precision, cutting down larger ships with surgical strikes. Marines launched boarding pods into hostile vessels, fighting with knives and rifles in brutal close combat. The battle lasted hours, the void choked with debris and flame. When at last the guns fell silent, the rift was a graveyard of shattered ships. Thousands of enemy vessels drifted lifeless, their wreckage glowing against the cold dark. And yet, the Resolute Dawn still stood, battered but unyielding. Word spread like wildfire: humanity had faced impossible odds and refused to break. The galaxy watched in horror and awe. On Earth, when the news of the Leon Rift reached the people, they did not mourn the dead. They did not falter. Instead, they rose higher. Factories doubled their output. Colonies emptied their prisons, offering redemption through service. Old grudges between nations dissolved into nothing, replaced by a single truth: they were no longer American, Chinese, or Martian. They were human. And together, they were vengeance. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. They thought Earth would respond with words. They thought grief would weaken them. But now, every corner of the stars whispered the same truth. Humanity would not stop. Not until the galaxy itself trembled. The war did not slow, it consumed. Months passed, measured not in days but in systems falling to fire. Where once star maps were filled with the banners of proud empires, now they showed fields of black where fleets had been turned to wreckage. Entire governments collapsed beneath the hammer of mankind's wrath. The galaxy pleaded for negotiation. The Council released statements dripping with desperation, calls for ceasefire, promises of investigation. But Earth remembered Hale's blood on polished marble. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive. And now, their vengeance had reached its final destination, the Zorian Confederacy. It was the Zorians who had plotted Hale's assassination, their agents' fingerprints found deep within the weapons core. For decades, they had feared Earth's rise, whispering that humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable to share the stars. So they had struck first, believing one bullet would snuff out the flame of a people. Instead, they had ignited a supernova. The human fleet gathered at the edge of Zorian space, a storm of steel stretching farther than the eye could see. Hundreds of dreadnoughts, their black hulls scarred from war, drifted like silent executioners. Carriers the size of continents released swarms of fighters that moved like clouds of fireflies in the void. At the heart of it all stood the Resolute Dawn, its hull patched and reforged a dozen times, still unbroken, still defiant. In the command chamber, General Marcus Reed stood before a massive holodisplay, his figure towering above his officers. The galaxy's most feared man was not shouting. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of destiny. They thought killing Hale would break us, he said, his words transmitted across every ship, every Marine's helmet, every fighter cockpit. But Jonathan Hale was not just a man. He was Earth. He was the embodiment of every child who grew up under our sky, every worker who built our worlds, every soldier who stood guard when hope was thin. When they killed him, they declared war on all of us. He paused, letting the silence sink deep into the hearts of his soldiers. And now, Reed said, his voice sharpening like steel drawn from the forge, we answer. The fleet thundered forward. The Zorians were ready. Or so they thought. Armadas of alien warships filled the void, layered in formations designed to overwhelm. Their vessels gleamed with jagged armor, their weapons glowing with plasma fire. Entire worlds had been stripped to fuel this last defense. Enemy strength overwhelming, reported Admiral Sarah Whitlock, her eyes fixed on the tactical readouts. They've emptied everything they have into this stand. Reed's lips tightened into the faintest shadow of a smile. Then this will be the last battle they'll ever fight. The first exchange lit the stars. Zorian cannons spat rivers of plasma, carving through the void like burning rivers. Human shields flared, ships rocking as the assault rained down. But then humanity answered. The Resolute Dawn's rail cannon fired, a bolt of hyperdense metal tearing through 3 Zorian cruisers in a single shot. Dreadnoughts unleashed broadsides that cracked enemy capitals apart. Swarms of human fighters streaked through the chaos, weaving between plasma fire, carving open weak points with surgical strikes. The void became a storm of light and death. On the Zorian command ship Verkael, panic spread like fire. They fight like demons, a Zorian officer screamed. We outnumber them 2-1, and still they advance. The Zorian commander's crest flattened in fear. They do not fight for conquest. They fight for vengeance. That makes them unstoppable. Back aboard the Resolute Dawn, the battle raged. The bridge shook as another plasma blast rocked the shields. Sparks flew from shattered consoles. Officers shouted over the din. Port batteries failing. Casualty reports flooding in. Enemy boarding pods incoming. Whitlock's jaw clenched. Hold the line. Push them back. Across the fleet, human Marines met Zorian boarders in brutal combat. Corridors filled with smoke, screams, and blood as rifles cracked and blades clashed. Marines fought with a fury born not of duty, but of wrath, their voices rising in a single cry. For Hale. For Earth. Then came the turning point. At the center of the Zorian fleet loomed their flagship, Krythos Eternal, a ship larger than any in their history, bristling with weapons designed to crush humanity in one blow. Its cannons unleashed a barrage that tore apart 3 human cruisers in seconds. Its shields glowed like a miniature sun, unbroken despite the storm pounding it. Reed studied the beast in silence. Then he gave the order. All ships, converge on the flagship. Break their spine, and the rest will fall. The human fleet surged forward, focusing their fury on the Krythos Eternal. Waves of fighters screamed in, bombarding its weak points. Dreadnoughts fired in unison, their combined firepower shaking its shields to the brink. The resolute Dawn closed the distance, its cannons roaring, tearing chunk after chunk from the Zorian Titan. On the bridge, Whitlock's eyes narrowed. One more push. The resolute Dawn's spinal cannon charged, its core humming like the heartbeat of a star. With a thunderous roar, it fired, unleashing a lance of destruction that speared the Krythos Eternal from bow to stern. The flagship split apart, its death throes lighting the void in a sunbright explosion. A cheer erupted across the human fleet. The Zorian lines wavered, then collapsed entirely. Ships broke formation, fleeing in terror. But there was no escape. Humanity pressed forward, relentless, merciless, sweeping the last of the Confederacy into ash and silence. When the battle ended, the stars over Zorian space were littered with wreckage. Burning hulks drifted like gravestones, silent reminders of a fallen power. General Reed stood at the observation deck of the resolute Dawn, watching the final fires fade. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, weary but unbroken. "This war was never about conquest," he said quietly, his words carried on secure channels to every surviving officer. "It was about justice. They took our leader, and we gave them judgment." Around him, the crew stood in silence, some weeping, some smiling grimly. Humanity had not risen as conquerors, nor as saviors. They had risen as something the galaxy would never forget, an eternal warning. To strike at Earth's heart was to invite annihilation. And from that day forward, across every world, every station, every council chamber of the stars, one truth echoed louder than all others. Mankind's wrath had crushed their armies forever.